Okay, so you want to make some product placement and visual effects, but you don't know where to start? Well, then this video is for you as I work on this shot and show you my entire workflow. As always, if you want to work along with us, you can download everything I use down below. Okay, so inside of Blender, of course, the first thing we have to do is camera track. So I'm going to go up to plus, VFX, and motion tracking and go ahead and open up our footage. I went ahead and converted my footage into a image sequence just so it's a little bit easier to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and hit A to select all my frames and then open the clip. And then we need to go ahead and change the color space to be the correct color space. So up in render, we're going to go down to color management and set it from filmic to standard. Then we can go ahead and in the track settings, we're going to go ahead and set the scene frames and prefetch our footage. I'm going to assume that you know a little bit about Blender, so I'm not going to go over everything in detail. So let's go ahead and camera track the scene. I'm going to go ahead and set the match to previous frame, normalize our footage, and go ahead and set our correlation to a 0.9 just to make sure that Blender tracks the correct markers accurately throughout our scene. And then what we can go and do is detect some features at the first frame of my footage down here. And then you'll see it's selected all these. I want to go ahead and select some more, so I'm going to set my threshold to a 0.01 and then distance to an 80, just so we have some more markers throughout our scene, and then Control T is to track those forward. Now at the very end of our footage, we can go ahead and detect some more features, and I want to go ahead and Control Shift T, and those will actually track backwards. And then let's do one final set at frame 60 at the middle of our footage. So I'm going to go ahead and detect features, Control T, track forward, go back to 60, Control Shift T, and track backwards. And now we have basically 3 sets of markers at the beginning, middle, and end of our footage. Now is where we kind of clean up manually some of the bad trackers. If I bring this window down here, you'll notice that we have the graph of all of our markers. Basically, we just need to select any outliers that we see. So like spikes like this, these are actually markers that aren't tracking as well. And so we just want to kind of manually select those and delete those as much as we can so we can get a better solve. Okay, so that looks pretty clean for my scene. Let's go and bring these down here. I'm going to go ahead and do a little visual pass because we do have a lot of moving cars in this shot. So I want to try to get out all that movement as possible. So I'll select some of these that it's attaching to the cars, delete some of those, and then I notice that there are some markers here that are kind of tracking a little bit weird because of the cars. And then just kind of scrub throughout here. We have one down here on this car. And the rest I think Blender can get out on its own. And so let's go ahead and get a solve error. So I'm going to come up to the solve tab. We're going to go ahead and set our A keyframe to be 40 and then 100 for the B. That's basically just the range that has the most amount of camera movement that we're going to be using to actually get a solve error. So let's go ahead and refine everything here and then solve our camera motion. Okay, so we got this as our solve error. We want that below a 0.3 if possible. So let's go ahead and clean up some of the tracks, and I'm just going to push that reprojection error all the way up until we're just selecting some of the top error tracks. Then we can go ahead and delete those tracks and resolve the camera motion. You can see that's already gotten it down to 0.5. I'm just going to repeat those steps a couple more times. Again, I want to try to get below a 0.3, trying to stick below a 0.2 if I can. So clean tracks again, reprojection error all the way up till we're selecting some of the few, delete, and then solve again. Okay, so I cleaned it up a couple more times and was able to get a 0.1 solve error, which is actually really good. So we are ready to go ahead and set up our camera scene and background. So I'm going to click those buttons. Let's bring this window down here, right click, join the areas just so we can see this a little bit nicer. Now we need to go ahead and define the floor plane. I know I want my kind of product to be in this kind of open area right here. However, when we actually set up a floor plane, Blender needs 3 points on the floor, and you can see that we're having some elevation changes right here. And so I want to try to get the floor as accurate as possible. So what I'm actually going to do is kind of manually add some 3 points to my scene. So around frame 90, I'm going to go ahead and control and click kind of this white dot down here, since that's kind of on my grassy area, and also this kind of white dot over here. If I just shift select those two and then Control T, track those forward. Now what we can do is we want to go ahead and solve the camera motion again just to get our solve error, and you can see it's not increased our solve error. That's very important. You don't want it to increase our solve error at all. And then now if we select this point, and then this point is also on our ground plane, we can now set that to be our floor. And since everything is solved, it's giving us a nice kind of floor plane there. Let's go ahead and set up the rotation of our scene. So I'm going to press this. Let's set the origin to be this marker. And then this marker we can set to be the x-axis like that. And so now our scene is basically rotated to how we want it. What I also want to do is go ahead and set the scale. So I believe when testing, these 2 points are about like 100 feet away, and so 100 feet converted to meters is about 30. So I'm going to go ahead and set the distance down to 30 right there. And if you come up here, you might notice that we don't see our block anymore, but it is there. I'll show you how to get that back. Now let's go into the layout scene and then go to camera view. Again, we're having that issue where we don't see it, and that's actually because of the camera clipping. So what we need to do is select our camera up here. Let's go into the data properties down to the clip start and end. And then we just need to increase the end of our clipping. I don't know why Blender sets it so low as default. It's just kind of an annoying thing. And so now we have our scene fully set up. We can go ahead and delete some of the stuff that Blender automatically sets up. So the background and foreground collection we don't need, and also the view layer, we don't need the background of that. And since we deleted all those nodes, we need to go ahead and delete these 4 nodes in the compositing section and plug our movie clip into the image of our alpha over. Again, this is just kind of stuff Blender automatically sets up when we set up a tracking scene, but I just like to work from scratch and, you know, add the stuff as we need it. And so now what we can do is I want to come out to the layout tab, and very important, since we're going to kind of be modeling out the scene a little bit, is to go into the camera properties, and we want to come down to background images. This basically set up the footage to be our background image. However, it does kind of undistort it in a way that to remove any lens distortion or anything. We actually want to uncheck this, and you can see if I kind of check and uncheck that, it's basically zooming out the edges and, you know, trying to correct for our lens correction. But again, we don't want to see that in our final thing. Okay, so now that we have the scene kind of set up and exactly how we want it, we want to go ahead and add our product in. Now down below you can download a blend file of just a very simple kind of model I made to kind of showcase this workflow. Of course, this is where you would actually be placing your own product in there, or, you know, a client or whatever you're doing. That's where you want to place your actual object in here. And so in order to do this and follow along with me, you can go ahead and come up to file, then you want to go to append, and you just want to locate that Blender file. So here is this Blender file. I'm just going to go ahead and double click inside of here, go into the object section, and then I believe it's called Makeup Baked. Yours will look a little bit different than mine, but you just want to find that model, and let's go ahead and pin that in the scene. And now we have the actual bottle, and of course, if it's sized differently for you, you just want to go ahead and scale that up. I do believe we do have to make sure that it is on the floor plane, and so you can see the bottle kind of rests on the floor plane here. I'm just going to move it up a little bit, so GZ there. And now it's exactly on the floor plane, because remember when we camera track the scene, since we set up the floor, we want to make sure that whatever we want to stick on our actual grass area is exactly on the floor plane. And so now that we have that, let's go ahead, and I want to go ahead and start organizing some things. So I'm going to add a new collection up here. Just going to name this the makeup collection, like that. And then let's go ahead and place our baked object into there. And so now that we have that, let's go ahead and let's delete the cube and also the light that it came with. It automatically set up a ground shadow catcher object. You can come into object properties, and inside of visibility, we actually can't see anything, and that's because we haven't set up our render settings. So we need to go up to render properties, go down to cycles, GPU compute if you have one. Let's denoise the viewport, but not the final render. Let's change our final render to a 128. We're going to be changing that in a little bit, and our viewport to a 64. And these are just some settings that I like to set as I work, just because it's kind of a fast way to render and kind of get a viewable thing. And of course, at the very end, we can up those and get a super high quality render. So now what I want to do is let's go ahead and place some of the product around. So I'm going to select this. Let's do Alt-D because we want to create an instance. It basically just copies all of the settings from that model. And if we apply it to any of the other models, so let's, you know, do that, all of our models are now going to be affected like that. And so that just saves on some render time and also some resources that Blender uses. So let's scale this up. I did set the origin to be the bottom, but you always just kind of want to make sure that whatever you do when you scale, it's always kind of resting on the exact bottom of our plane here. And so now we have kind of this look. Of course, you can lay it out however you want. And then I want to go ahead and Alt-D, again, move that over here. Let's rotate on the X, on the Z 90 degrees. And then we can just come to the side view and just snap that up until it's resting kind of on our ground plane again. Like that. Let's actually scale this down a little bit. So something maybe like that. And then now we can put it on the ground and kind of position that exactly where we want it to be. I'm going to hide this ground plane by hitting H. And then let's just rotate that and kind of place that right there. So of course you can play around with the rotation and scaling of your objects. Again, the most important thing is that we just have everything kind of on this floor plane. And so now that we have all that set up, we can go ahead and get into kind of the lighting and the rendering. So if I come to the render view, again, that's just holding Z. I don't see my footage anymore, so let's go up to the render properties, down to a film, and then change it to transparent. And as I was showing you before, it's automatically set up our ground object to be a shadow catcher. So if I Alt-H, unhide that, And then if I come to the object properties, we can come down to visibility, and now we have all these settings since we're in cycles now, and it's automatically set this kind of ground plane to be a shadow catcher mask, and so that's exactly what we want it to be. However, it's a very white kind of very white reflective material. And so what we need to do is go ahead and actually import some lighting in our scene, and then we need to actually change the material of this object to match closer to the actual footage of our clip. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to be using a HRI. It's basically an image with baked in lighting. So you want to go ahead and download that. Let's change the color to environment texture. And I'm going to open up that image. Okay, so here is the HRI. Let's click that, open the image. And now you can see that we have this in our scene. You'll notice that it's all very blown out, and that's actually because we're on the wrong color space for this specific tutorial. Again, we did the standard view transform before because we were actually working with footage, but since we only want to render out the CG during this part, we want to come up to the render properties, go all the way down to color management, and now we want to set this from standard to AGX. This is just to, maintain the right color space for all of our accuracy. And so let's go ahead and make this a new material. So I'm going to come over here, go to shader editor. Let's hit N to hide that and add a new material. I'm just going to name this the ground material. And the principled BSDF is what's giving us our shadows. And so if I take that off, you'll see that everything is black and unshaded. And so what we actually need to do is keep the principled BSDF, but apply our actual image sequence onto it. And so what we can do is Shift A, add a image node, image texture node, and then we can go ahead and open up that. You want to select your image sequence again, open the image, and very important, you do want to make sure that we have auto refresh on, because then it'll actually update to the current frame instead of just being kind of a still image. So now with that, we can plug the color into the base color, and you can see that it's changed a little bit here, but again, it's not showing us our actual footage. And that's actually because it's using the UV of our plane object to actually project the image onto it. And since we don't really have a UV setup, it's actually showing nothing right now. So what we need to do is we need to use a add-on that comes default with Blender. So edit, preferences, add-ons, and then you just want to type in node and make sure the Node Wrangler add-on is installed and checked. And then you can come down here and save the preferences. Let's exit out of here. And so with that node installed, we can go ahead and Control T, and that'll add a texture coordinate and mapping node. The only thing that we have to know here is we want to set it from, instead of our UV being projected, we want it to be a window vector. And so now whatever we're kind of viewing it through is actually going to project our texture onto that object. And so since we're going to be viewing it from the camera's point of view, it's basically just projecting that footage onto our actual plane down here. And so what I want to do is, first of all, you'll notice that we don't have it matching at all. Let's actually come up here. I want to select outline selected off, and then if I come up to the camera, go to background images again and change the opacity all the way up, we can see that there's kind of a seam here, and so we want to try to eliminate that seam as much as possible. So if I select that ground object again, we can come over here, and with the principled BSDF, it's a little changed from the previous versions of Blender, so you do want to make sure that you're working in Blender 4.0 or up. Let's change the roughness all the way up, and then the specular we can change all the way down, so that gets rid of some of the reflection. And then we also need to go ahead and correct the gamma, because you'll notice that there is still like a seam here. So I'm just going to zoom in. Let's bring this over here, Shift A, add a gamma node. And if we place that into here, we can just increase that a little bit until they match much more closely. And so again, we don't have to match it super closely because we are just going to be using this as a shadow catcher. And so we're just doing this again because of the reflections. We're actually going to see that material on the reflections of our kind of makeup bottles here. And so we want to make sure the reflections match as closely as possible to that. I'm actually going to select this. Let's turn the outline selected back on, and then select that and S to scale that outwards. You will notice that we're having a little bit of like clipping issues here, and so what I like to do is come out, instead of repeat, I'm going to set it to mirror, just so it's a nicer kind of fall off like that. So now that we have all that set up, we'll notice that the kind of sun direction is going the wrong direction. If I kind of zoom in to the trees down here, you'll notice that it's basically going down into the left. And so we want to try to mimic that as closely as possible. Let's come up to Object, to World, and you can see our HDRI we uploaded. We want to go ahead and again Control T to add a texture coordinate and mapping node. And then with the Z rotation, we basically just want to rotate it until it's basically matching the basic direction. You can get real advanced into it and play around with it for your scene, but that looks pretty good, matching the direction. And what's nice is since we correctly set up the correct scale in our scene in motion tracking, it's actually giving us very accurate kind of shadow fall off here. You'll notice that it's very fuzzy the farther away, and then it's very kind of sharp close by. And so that's actually how shadows would react in the real world. It's going to be hard to kind of notice over here, but with bigger buildings and stuff like that, the shadow over here is a little bit more fuzzy than if it was closer to the actual base of the object. And so now that we have all that set up, we are ready to go ahead and set this ground object to be a shadow catcher again. So we're going to set that. Let's go ahead and make it its own collection for use in compositing later. So I'm going to name this shadow and put the ground object into our shadow collection. Now we basically have our makeup that we can turn on and off, and we also have our shadow that we can turn on and off. That's really nice. Of course, if I zoom in here, the HDRI pick is also going to give us reflections in our scene. And so this is where we have to kind of model out a little bit of the scene and add some reflections of the actual city back into our scene. And so that is super easy. Let's go ahead and I'm going to add a new kind of mesh plane. We want to make sure it's in its own collection. So I'm right click and then add a new reflections collection. Place the plane inside of there. And then with that, let's come out to solid view. I want to X 90 degrees. And then we can just scale that up. Basically what I want to do is I want to surround this makeup thing with a bunch of kind of fake reflections that we're going to do. And you could get real involved into it and actually like model out each of the buildings, but since we're not going to be anywhere close to any of the buildings where it actually matter, I'm just going to go ahead and place some fake planes. So let's kind of Shift Z, move that over there. Then I'm going to rotate so it's facing more towards the camera. I do want to make sure it kind of takes up the entire outline of our product here. So I'm going to S scale that up here, GZ, move that up. And then what I also want to do is go and X to just scale that outwards, and then we can scale it up. Basically, I'm just trying to give it a large surface area that it's actually going to use for reflections. Again, we do need to project that texture onto it now, because if I come out of here, it's this huge kind of white thing, and that's not giving us accurate reflections at all. So let's go ahead and make a new material again. We're going to kind of follow the same setup as we did before, but a little bit of changes. What I do want to do is I want to come to frame 1, because whatever I actually bake the texture on, I want it to be the first frame of my footage. And so let's go to object, and then I'm going to add a new texture. Just going to name this footage baked, like that. And then let's go to our principal BSDF. We actually don't need this, since we don't need to have any lighting or shadows baked into this. So I'm going to delete the principal BSDF. And let's add another image texture. And so since I want this to be baked, I'm not going to use the entire image sequence. I'm just going to use one frame from the image sequence. And so since I'm on frame 1, we're going to be using the first frame. So let's open that up. Okay, so again, frame 1, select that, open the image, and now we have that. Let's plug color into the surface. And now we basically have the plane being projected with our footage on just frame 1. And so now that we have that, we need to, of course, try to match it as closely as possible. It doesn't really matter too much for this scene, but let's just try to match it, as close as we can. What we have to do is we have to actually go ahead and bake it in, because if I Control T and make it a window, wherever we're viewing it from, it'll actually update to that. And since we're actually camera tracking through our video, it's not going to give us a good reflection. It actually might be some artifacts left on our camera. So what we have to do is we have to, again, come to frame 1, and we're going to go and bake the texture onto our plane. So let's come over here to the modifiers tab. I'm going to add a subdivision surface modifier. And this is just to get more geometry onto our actual plane, because right now we only have 4 vertices, and the more vertices we have, the more accurate projecting textures are going to be. And so what we need to do is just go ahead and make it simple and change those to 6. Then I'm just going to go ahead and hit apply. Now if we hit tab, we have a lot more data here. So now that we have that on frame 1 again, let's hit go to tab, edit mode, A, and then we need to hit U to basically UV unwrap everything. And then I'm going to hit project from view. And what that'll do is it'll actually project it from view, so you'll notice that nothing has really changed. However, if now we come out of the camera view, you'll notice nothing has really changed again, because we actually have it set to window over here. So we need to change it back to UV. And now that we have that, we basically have our texture projected exactly how it would be with the window view. But now we can actually move around the scene and it won't change. And so now that we have that set up, let's go ahead and come over here. I do want to go ahead and set the repeat to mirror again, just so we have better fall off. And now we have behind our makeup, which is looking good. We also want it on the sides of our makeup and basically just surrounding all of the areas. So what I'm going to do is let's Shift D, duplicate that, rotate it around there. And this one I'll place like right there. What we do have to do every single time that we do this is go ahead and update the projecting from view. So again, that's super easy. Tab A U project from view. So now it's automatically updated over there. And so finally, we just want to go ahead and we want to get this side. So I'm just going to Alt D this time, just duplicate that and place that over here. Just so we can see kind of the reflections over here away from the camera. And then finally, we need to do this side as well. So what I'm going to do is, again, Shift D, duplicate that, and then place it right there, something right around that area. And then, of course, AU project from view. And so now that we have all of this set up and we're having very accurate reflections in our scene, what we need to do is go ahead and set up our kind of render passes so we can go ahead and get into compositing. So if I come out to the compositing tab now, what we basically have is our movie clip being combined with whatever we render out of our layout view. And so let's go ahead and do that. Let's come to solid view and render an image. Okay, so here's our image. We have a ton wrong. We can see that we have our makeup, and it's casting shadow, which is good. But we also have all the reflection kind of planes that we made in our scene, and they're also casting shadow on the shadow catcher, and everything is just kind of messed up. So let's go through the process of actually rendering out multiple passes inside Blender so we can composite them separately and get a good result. And so let's come out of here. What I want to do is I want to go ahead and set up a new view layer. Now, view layers are basically ways to break up into multi, pass compositing. So what we want to do is we want basically one layer where it's just our makeup, and then we want another layer where it's basically just the shadow of our scene. Okay, so first thing I want to do is just get the makeup isolated in itself. So let's come to the foreground, and I want to change this to just be makeup for now. And then what we need to do is tell Blender the different passes that we want for our different collections. So if I come up here, we'll have this kind of indirect only pass that we can enable. And what that will basically do is if we select the shadow to be indirect only, it'll basically mean that whatever is in the shadow collection, which should just be our ground object, is basically only going to do indirect stuff. And so as you can see here, we have a lot of ambient occlusion, and also you can see some of the reflection of our actual ground. And so that is all the indirect stuff of our actual scene, but we're not seeing that at all. And so that's exactly what we want. We also want to do that for the reflections as well. So I'm going to set that to be indirect only as well. And now we have basically this scene without our reflections pass or our ground pass, and so that will basically be just the makeup like I named my view layer up here. Let's go ahead and make a new view layer. So click that. This one I just want to be our shadow view layer. And so of course we just want to basically do the same thing that we just did, but now the opposite. For this view layer, we don't need the reflections collection, so I'm just going to turn that off. And then for the makeup, we want to do the exact same thing and set it to be indirect only. So again, indirect only here. And now we basically just have the shadow into our scene. Now let's go ahead and go up to compositing. And we need to go ahead, Shift D, duplicate the render layers node and select our shadow layer to be viewable. And now that we have all that set up, let's go and render a new image. Okay, so once that's rendered out, you can see we haven't composited everything yet, so it might be a little iffy here, but let's exit out of here. And now if we shift, control, and click, we can view the different passes. So we have this makeup pass right here is just kind of the makeup object with a transparent background. And then our shadow pass is just the shadow with a transparent background. So now with all that set up, we want to go ahead and render them out to composite in a separate program such as Nuke, After Effects, anything like that. I'm going to be sticking inside of Blender for this tutorial just to make it a little bit easier for you guys to follow along. But of course, I would normally take this inside of Nuke or again After Effects or DaVinci Fusion and really get into the compositing to make it as accurate as possible. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's Shift A, add a file output node. This is basically another version of the composite node that basically lets you set up multiple passes to render at the same time. To go into the settings, let's come over here to node and then properties. And let's go ahead and set a base path for this to render into. Okay, so once you made it its own folder, let's hit accept. And then down here is where we actually have the different inputs. I'm going to be saving it as a PNG sequence for both. But of course, you can also do Open EXR multi-layer, but that's a little bit different process in Blender. So for me, I'm just going to stick with PNG. We want to make sure that we have RGBA selected for the alpha channel. And then compression, you can turn it to whatever kind of ratio you want there. Of course, let's add a new input since we have two. I'm going to put the first one into the first socket and the second one into the second socket. So let's go ahead and name them. I'm going to double click inside of there and let's just name it that. I like adding a underscore at the very end of mine to kind of differentiate the frame number from the actual, name of my file. And so let's click the other one, double click there, and add shadow underscore. And so whatever we render out the image, it's actually going to take this name and then replace it with the frame number at the very end, since we're rendering it as a sequence. So now that we have all that set up, let's go ahead and again view our different renders. We'll notice that my makeup is super noisy, and so this is where we go in and actually set up our render settings now to get some high quality renders. And so I'm going to come out to layout section. Let's go into the shadow view layer, the makeup view layer, just view our main one that we want to denoise. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add a denoise node and denoise it myself in compositing before we actually render everything. So in order to do that, let's go to the view layer, add denoising data here. And if we come up to compositing again, you'll see that our node has changed and it's added all this other information for denoising. Let's Shift A, add a denoise node, plug the image into the image, the normal into the normal, and then the albedo into the albedo, and make sure that denoise is feeding into our makeup kind of PNG sequence right there. And so now with all that set up, let's go ahead and save the project and render an image. Okay, so once your render has finished, again, this is just whatever you plug into the composite node. And so since we're not using the composite node, we can honestly just unplug that. And let's go ahead and just delete the movie clip and alpha over node, since that's going to take some resources to actually calculate in the compositing step. And so now we have both of these going to here. You do want to still have your composite node. For some reason, there's a glitch, and if you don't have that in, it's actually not going to work with the file output node. Just kind of a weird thing there that I found. So you do want to make sure you just have it kind of floating up here in space. Again, since we don't have any output properties, it's just going to be sending everything into the temporary file location. And so the main thing that we're going to be doing in rendering is this base path right here. And so now, since we rendered out an image, it actually uploaded some of the passes inside of this folder. So let's go check them out. Okay, so here is my passes. You can see that we have a makeup pass and then also a shadow pass. And so for this process, we're basically going to have two different image sequences inside the same folder, and then we can organize them a little bit later. But let's go ahead, and with everything set up, you can of course change your sample count if you want. I recommend like a 256 or above is usually pretty good if you are denoising. We're not going to be denoising the shadow pass, since I didn't really have any problems with that. But with everything set up and, do a couple test renders, of course, on your end, we can come up here and render the final animation. Okay, so once everything has rendered out, let's go ahead and go to File, New, General. We just want to go ahead and do our compositing in its own project, so we're not messing around with the compositing of the separate project. So now what we can do is go up to the Compositing tab. Let's hit Use Nodes, and we don't need this Render Layers node since we're not going to be rendering any CGI. Let's go ahead and add a image node. Then we need to go ahead and upload our footage first. So again, just that image sequence, let's open that up. Then I'm going to go Shift D to get that down, and let's locate our separate passes. Of course, this is where you can organize them and put them in their own folder. I'm just going to leave them in kind of the base folder and do it myself. So I'm going to select the first kind of makeup PNG one, and then scroll all the way down to, I believe, 121 is my last frame. So Shift click that and then open the image. Then we can Shift D, duplicate that down, and we just want to select the shadow pass now. So scroll all the way down, select the first frame of our shadow pass, then all the way to the bottom, Shift click and open the image there. And now we have all of our passes in our scene. Okay, so finally, let's get into the compositing of everything. Let's Shift A, add a alpha over node. That's basically how we composite things that have alpha over top of each other. If you think of it as kind of a layer system, that's how we would do it with nodes. So my image for my makeup pass, I want on the bottom of my alpha over, and then my makeup background, I want on top of my alpha over. So if I Control Shift and click, we can add a viewer node, and we can see we have a lot of stuff that's kind of wrong right now. First of all, it might be hard to see on YouTube, but we actually have a white border going around our makeup, and that's actually because our alpha isn't applied yet. You can see that we have this alpha for our actual channel, and what you can do is if you actually want to go ahead and just hit Convert Pre-Multiply on here, you can do that, or we can go ahead and Shift A and set alpha. We just want to plug the image inside of there and then the alpha inside of there, and basically that will apply the alpha channel. And so then you don't need to convert the pre-multiply, and that's useful if you do want to add, like let's say we want to add a glare node that actually needs it to be pre-multiplied before you actually hit the glare node, and set it to fog, glow, and then just change down the threshold. This is a very popular node, and so that's just kind of the workflow that you would do to pre-multiply the alpha. So next thing we want to do is go ahead and, of course, set it in the correct color space. The whole reason we're doing this is to actually go ahead and work in the correct color space for the footage and also the CG. So render properties, color management, and finally we can set it back to standard. It's a very convoluted process, but trust me, when you kind of work with it a little bit, you'll understand the reasons why. The final thing we need to do is add the shadow back into our scene. So let's go ahead and Shift A. I want to add a color balance node. That's kind of the node that I like to color correct the most in. So let's go ahead and add our alpha into the factor, just so we are affecting the kind of alpha of our shadow. I like to go and set it to offset power slope instead of the normal one. Then let's play around with some of these values. I just want to try to match the shadow into our scene as much as I can. So let's increase the power a little bit and then decrease the slope. So something like that. You just want to try to replicate it to the shadows of the actual scene as much as possible. What I will notice of the actual shadows in the scene are they are a little tinted blue. You can see ours are very black right now, and so what we want to do, I like bringing this slope and tinting it blue a little bit. You can see that it's really adding some of the blue highlights in it more. And I just found that it matches more closely to the scene. Again, I'm mostly a Nuke compositor, and so this is where I would take it inside of Nuke and actually get really involved into matching it exactly to the scene. But this is the basic setup inside of Blender. Once you're happy with a result and kind of match some of the settings there, what we can do is finally plug the alpha over into the composite, and we are actually ready to render out the final animation. Now I'm going to be rendering it as a movie clip this time instead of a image sequence. Of course, depending on what you're going to be doing with this footage after, render out on whatever settings that you want. But let's go over here, go to the output section, and set a new folder location. After you have that, we can go to File Format, go to FFmpeg Video, and then you can use whatever you want. Again, I just use QuickTime for me, MOV format. And then let's set the quality to high quality. H.264 is totally fine for what I'm going to use this clip for, but of course change that. And then once you have all of those render settings correct, we can come up here and render the final animation. Okay, so here is the final result that we got from this tutorial. Hopefully you guys were able to follow along and get a similar result that you are very proud of. Anyways, it'd mean a lot to me if you guys consider liking and subscribing, as it would help out the channel with the YouTube algorithm. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.